Good evening, everybody. We're glad to see you tonight. Thanks for being here as we join together for Bible study. We're studying a series of lessons entitled Major Tests of Our Faith. If you're looking at your study guide, we're on lesson 4 tonight. But the subject for discussion tonight is, so here's a test of your faith. How do you handle it when you face disappointment from other Christians? In other words, other Christians let you down. Other Christians are a discouragement to you. You're trying to do your best. You're trying to be what you ought to be. But especially I think it's true in the local congregation where we're members, although we all know Christians in other places. But I think especially we're close to the people in the local congregation, and someone disappoints us, someone discourages us. How do we move forward? A lot of the questions that Brother Hall composed for this lesson, he was really dealing with the idea of new converts or young Christians. And he said oftentimes new converts, young Christians, have unrealistic expectations. And when they see some other Christians, maybe older Christians, maybe people who've been Christians for a while, when new converts see that, they grow discouraged and disillusioned, and maybe they fall away. I think that is a particular concern, but I'm telling you, I don't think the idea of being discouraged by fellow Christians is something that's unique to new converts. I think we all face that from time to time. Josh?
Yeah, I thought the same thing as I was looking through this material. Even though he's got it directed toward new converts, I think you're absolutely right. It could be a challenge for all of us.
So how are we going to handle that? We're going to talk about maybe young Christians in particular, but I really think this has application for us all. And he starts out by suggesting to us to look at the parable of the sower in Matthew chapter 13. So if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 13. And of course, out of the 4 types of soil that Jesus described in the parable of the sower, 3 out of the 4 ended up not sticking it out, not enduring, not bringing forth fruit to perfection. I don't know I don't think you could draw any percentages from that. I don't think that means that 75% of people who initially become Christians will ultimately fall away. But what it is saying, I think, is that there's at least a significant danger that those who become Christians will become discouraged and disillusioned and fall away. So there was the wayside soil, there was the stony places, and there was the seed that grew up among thorns. None of those brought forth fruit to fulfillment. And so again, 3 out of the 4 fell away. Now, you know the parable of the sower. Let's look at that in Matthew 13 as Jesus described the parable of the sower. In Matthew 13, verse 18, he says, "Hear ye therefore the parable of the sower. When anyone heareth the word of the kingdom and understandeth it not, then cometh the wicked one and catcheth away that which was sown in his heart. This is he which receives seed by the wayside. But he that received the seed into stony places, the same is he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receiveth it. Yet hath he not root in himself, but dureth for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises because of the word, by and by he is offended. He also that receives seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful. But he that receives seed into the good ground is he that heareth the word and understandeth it, which also beareth fruit and bringeth forth some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. So again, we know that parable well. I didn't think that this parable in particular addressed the theme of this lesson. It talks about the fact that people can fall away. I think it really, I guess the main point I would want to make from this is I don't want to be a contributing factor to that. Jesus was definitely saying that a lot of people who hear the word, even some who initially receive it joyfully, are not going to endure. They're not going to stick with it. And there's a variety of reasons. I don't think that our topic for tonight is in that parable. In other words, being discouraged or disillusioned by other Christians. I don't think that's in that parable. But that certainly could cause someone to fall away. I'll tell you, I don't want to be the one who causes that. I don't want to contribute to that.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. I probably spent too much time thinking about the answer to his question, because I do think it's kind of not really in line with the rest of the questions. But so we all fall into one of those groups of soil, though. You know, I mean, we want to be the good soil. We want to be the one that is obviously going to bring forth fruit. But there's some that are going to fall away. I mean, you think the stony soil, their faith is shallow, and so they're going to fall away. If hard time comes, they don't have a lot of depth, and so they fall away. Or the soil that has thorns there, I mean, the cares of the world will choke them out. So that could be discouraging if we see people halfway kind of get started and then fall away. And so I guess to kind of go along with our lesson, we could be disappointed in that, but that's a reality. We're one of those 4 types of soil.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this?
I think on new converts, the biggest thing that discourages them is peer pressure and family. And that is a big factor where they are able to stick it out or not. And most of the time, we as a church, we don't help those new converts as we should, and we ought to be, inviting them to our homes and to our gatherings and so forth.
Be more perceptive to their needs. Yeah, I think you're right. So think about it this way. Because we've known, I mean, it happens in every place. It certainly has happened at College View, where we've had people who have fallen away. Some who have been Christians for some time who have fallen away. But certainly we've experienced this situation where maybe new Christians have not stuck it out or endured. Would you want to be, in the final judgment day, would you want to be held accountable for the fact that your example, your influence in the local church contributed to that person falling away? That's why I think we just got to be on our toes, constantly on guard, because even subtle little things someone can take the wrong way and be a discouragement to them. So I think we've got to be really extra careful, more so than maybe you imagine. Your example, your influence, just something as simple as how you attend services, how you participate in the work, maybe the things you say, maybe how you act before and after services. Little things can have a bigger impact than you imagine.
Yeah, Greg, I was thinking, because we're talking about disappointment in other Christians. So, I think sometimes maybe I read this parable and I'm just thinking about, well, this is the person that just wanders in, off the street and comes in here and hears a lesson. But maybe to make it more personal, maybe this is a person that I studied with and that I, helped do my part of sowing the seed, and then they obey the gospel and then they fall away. And so that's a disappointment to me, because I'm putting this time and effort into it. I sowed the seed to them. I taught them, got them to the point to obey the gospel, and they did. And I was so excited. Then they fell away. And now I'm just absolutely devastated, because I put all that time and effort into it. And I feel like I'm a failure. Maybe I didn't do a good enough job teaching, or I didn't do a good enough job encouraging. So I think there's kind of 2 sides of that. I need to be a good example, but part of it's on them. If I do everything right, they gotta take ownership.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a good point to make. We're not saying that if someone falls away, it's always somebody else's fault.
Yeah, so
we might be a contributing cause, but ultimately they're personally accountable. Right. Yep. Yeah, I think. All right, go ahead, Josh.
No, so number 2, if nobody's else got any questions or any comments on number 1, let's move on to number 2. So it says, consider Philippians chapter 2. So if you'll turn over there, we'll read those 2 or 3 verses in Philippians 2, verses 19 to 21. All right, Philippians 2, beginning at verse 19. It says, but I trust in the Lord Jesus to send Timotheus shortly unto you, that I also may be of good comfort when I know your state. For I have no man like-minded who will naturally care for your state. For all seek their own, not the things which are Jesus Christ's. But ye know the proof of him, that as a son with the Father he hath served with me in the gospel. Him therefore I hope to send presently, so soon as I shall see how it will go with me. Well, I read more than I'm supposed to. So consider Philippians 2. beginning verse 19 to 21 there that we read. And the question is, what did Paul say was generally true of the Christians of his day? So the answer is pretty straightforward there, but Paul said in verse 21 that most Christians of his day seek their own, not the things which are Jesus Christ. That's pretty tough. You know?
That's a hard analysis, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I was reading, just reading through that, and I thought, man, Paul is pretty tough. So most of the Christians in Paul's day, or at least this letter to Philippi, he wrote that there's a lot of people that are seeking their own. So they're selfish. They're looking out for themselves, not the things of the Lord's. And so we're talking about disappointment in other Christians. And I guess from that, I would take that Paul couldn't be discouraged if other people were doing wrong, if there are Christians not having their focus where it ought to be. I mean, I think Paul wanted to encourage them. He wanted them to do right, but that wasn't going to cause him to lose faith because others weren't doing the things that they were supposed to do.
I would tell you, if Paul would analyze Christians of the first century in that way, and again, as we said, it's a pretty harsh analysis. He says, for all. In other words, he didn't say there are some folks who are selfish and self-centered and seek their own interest. Yeah. He said all seek their own. So, I mean, this was a pervasive problem in the first century church. But I'm going to tell you, I think if that was so back then, it would even be more so in our day. We've often talked about the fact we live in a really selfish, self-centered time and age. And so this can be a discouragement. JD?
Just a question kind of about the context here. I don't think it diminishes the point at all, but do we think maybe he's talking about a smaller group of people? Because it sounds like he may be referencing people who would be available for him to send rather than all Christians generally?
Possibly. I would say contextually that's possible. However, it seems to me that he's just making a broad, sweeping statement.
I mean, either way.
People are self-centered, but Timothy's not, and I'm going to send him. So I think he meant to paint with a pretty broad brush there that there's a sort of a overwhelming problem of people being self-centered and.
Well, I was going to say it's kind of in contrast. You go back up in the chapter, at about verse 5 where he says, "Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." He in verse 7 made himself of no reputation. So it's kind of contrasting Jesus and his attitude, and then Timothy, and then other Christians in general, whether that be everybody or whether that be just a small group of people. It's kind of a contrast. Like Jesus was humble and he was obviously looking out for the cares of others, and then you got all these that seek their own and not the things of the Lord's. What a contrast! And I think things haven't changed much. To your point,
I think you're right. The thing though that I think is interesting is Timothy was okay in that environment.
Yeah.
Paul was okay in that environment, and so what if we are surrounded by selfish, self-centered, non-sacrificial people? Is that good? Well, you can make it.
It's possible to make it.
You can still do it.
Yeah. Well, and Timothy, I mean, what a glowing recommendation to him. So he says in verse 19, in verse 20, "I have no man like-minded who will naturally care for your state." So, Paul basically saying, if I'm going to send anybody, Timothy is somebody that's right on the same page with me that's going to care for you. He's not going to be self-centered like that, and he's going to care for you the way you ought to be cared for.
And he said there in verse 20, you know the proof of him. In other words, Timothy had a track record. Yeah. He said, and he thought that the brethren at Philippi would know that his reputation, his established track record was that you know the proof of him. He's not like that. Yeah. And that speaks pretty high of Timothy. Wayne?
It seems in the context, especially if you look at verse 22, that he's not talking about the personal faith of the Christians there, but he's talking about their willingness or their desire to support him in the work of preaching and teaching the gospel. Because in verse 22 he says, "But you know it's proven work that he serves with me in the furtherance of the gospel like a child serves his father." So it seems like he's not talking about the person's individual faith, but their desire to see the gospel being spread beyond where they are.
Yeah.
Sort of like, we commonly say, well, you got to take the gospel outside the building.
Yeah.
And they didn't have that desire to do that.
Or I've heard people say, the opportunity arises to support evangelism maybe in some other place, maybe some foreign country. We got plenty of lost people right around here. We don't have to be going off to other parts of the world to preach the gospel. You've heard people use those kind of statements. And so that would be sort of the idea of seeking your own, people sort of have tunnel vision. It's just about what's right here in front of me. And he says Timothy wasn't that way. All right, I think those are all good points. But I do think that can be a discouragement when we run into people who seek their own things, not the things which are of Jesus Christ. All right, so then Brother Hall asked us in the lesson, discuss the differences between the picture someone might have of ideal Christians versus the picture, the reality, the real picture of Christians in a typical local church. So let's start with the first part of that. What would you, if you were going to imagine an ideal group of Christians, what would be true of this ideal group of Christians? I'm looking for a church. I've got in my mind, I got a picture in my mind of what I want in a church. What would you want if you could spell out your ideals? Anybody? Carol?
They have strong faith and they're faithful in most everything.
Strong faith, faithful in everything.
They'd be perfect.
Perfect in the sense, well, we're going to be realistic here. We understand that only Jesus was sinlessly perfect, but these people are perfect in the sense that they're really mature. They got their act together. They don't make a lot of mistakes, right? What else? Wade?
You want people that are go-getters, people that are willing to go out and do Bible studies.
Hard workers.
Hard workers.
Self-starters.
Right, self-starters. Very good.
Okay. What else? Eric? You're grinning. You know what you want. What do you want? Okay. Anybody else? So I had what Sue had. I want them to be perfect in the sense of spiritually mature. But I tell you, I'd like the church full of people who are just super kind and loving and helpful. Who really let me know that they care about me, and they do it pretty regularly. I want a church where I don't have to wonder in the back of my mind, what do those people think anyway? Would they stab me in the back if they got a chance to do so? I want this kind, loving, helpful. What else do you have on your list?
Well, I was kind of thinking like Sue, but I think we're unrealistic a lot of times if we think about ideal. So I put down we're unrealistic, and so maybe we picture people that always do the right thing, always act appropriately, never has issues, their family's perfect, but we're totally unrealistic when we think that way, and especially the next question is going to
So
talk to
what's the reality? Instead of that perfect picture that I have in my mind of the church that I would like to exist, what do we typically find in a local church?
Well, we find some struggles. I mean, there's going to be real life issues. Hopefully it's people trying to do right, but nobody's perfect, and so there's going to be issues.
A couple of things that I put on my list. In any local church, you're going to find, we're kind of used to each other, and we kind of acknowledge, one another. But if you stood back and looked at us, we're kind of quirky. And we're a little bit weird. There's some weirdness going on here, If you just had a completely disinterested third person who just walked in and looked at us and said, man, those people are weird. That's just the reality. Because we all have our idiosyncrasies. We're all, we all have our little quirks, and personal traits, you know. But beyond that, what we also find more seriously is I think we find some people in any local church who are judgmental, who are mean-spirited, who are unkind, unhelpful. Not, Carol said faithful in all things. There are people who are not faithful in all things. You know, the reality is that perfect church doesn't exist, you know. And how many times have you heard people say, if you find the perfect church, don't align yourself with it because you will be the one who makes it now not perfect, right?
Yeah, it's true. Well, I was thinking about this, you know, if you ever, and I know sometimes there's people here that'll comment, people on like Facebook, they'll put on I Heart Columbia or whatever it is, and I'm looking for a church, you know, and they got their list of things that they're looking for in a church, and I'm thinking about visiting a church, and then all these people are like, visit here and visit here. But it's always like a laundry list of demands, and I was thinking about that, about this ideal church. I think people have this ideal thought, and they think, you know, it's got to be perfect. It's just not reality. I mean, there's going to be people that do things wrong from time to time. Maybe they don't mean to, or say things that they shouldn't. And so we're going to have troubles that we're going to have to work through. And that's just the reality of it. You're right. I mean, if there's perfect people, they don't want me a part of the group because I'll ruin the whole thing.
You know what I think? So what takes us from this church that's less than perfect? What moves us? I mean, how do we accept that without becoming completely discouraged and disillusioned? What is the factor that makes it so that we can abide a less than perfect church? JD?
Say, I mean, to some degree, people should have higher standards of, you know, church-going folks, but at the same time, you should have that realization that people are people, and you're going to find people with different personalities and traits and things like that anywhere you go, including, you know, church-going folks.
Yeah.
But I think what really makes a difference is people who are imperfect, but they're more like people like David, who are willing to realize that they are doing something. And, you know, I'm not even talking about something as serious as some of the stuff we looked at with David, but just, I realized, you know, maybe I hadn't been acting quite as nice to folks lately. And so you kind of, people who are trying to self-correct and they're self-aware.
I think that's right. I think it's Sue.
Kind of the same thing JD was saying, that all of us can never give up. We always have to keep trying to be better.
Yeah.
That we're never enough.
I don't care if people think I'm weird. They'll just have to put up with that. We can't go there, right? We can't go there. Wayne.
This pretty well describes the way African churches look at American churches. They look at us as being, well, you know, we're the perfect church. We're the, and we have to really reinforce this concept. Don't put your faith in men. Put your faith in the Word. And so sometimes we come across as we just have all the answers. And so they put their faith in us. And if they see us doing things that are discouraging or we ought not to be doing, then it can cause them to lose their faith because their faith is in us and not in the Word.
Yeah.
And so that's what we really have to reinforce is your faith should not be in men. Your faith should be in the Word of God. Because it's perfect, men are not.
I think you're exactly right. And that's what's got to move us past the potential discouragement of interpersonal relations in a local congregation. They're not perfect. Sometimes there's big issues. A lot of times they're just smaller little annoyances. But whatever it is, we've got to work through that because our faith is not in this church, it's in the Lord. And we've got to be faithful in. Wait.
Yeah, I was just thinking, that kind of goes back to the first question. Because, you know, you have people come in here and there may be new converts or whatever, and they're looking at me, and I goof up and make a mistake, and they say, well, I'm just quitting. Because, you know, I looked at Wade and I thought he was a good guy, and here he's made this stupid mistake, you know. And you're exactly right. We can't put our faith in men. We got to put our faith in God.
Yeah. There was a follow-up question here, but I think we kind of covered it, Josh. some reasons why there's a difference between the ideal and the reality.
Yeah, so for that question, I'll tell you what I put down. I was just thinking about, we got this ideal and then we got reality, but I was thinking about the Apostle Paul, and I was just thinking about if we look at him, what he was like before he was converted, and then he's converted to Christ, and then he comes and wants to be a member of the church that you're at, how difficult will that be? Because Paul, he persecuted Christians and put his vote against them to put them to death. And I really spent some time, I don't know if I was on the right track or not, but I spent some time thinking about what if one of my family members or one of the people that Paul put to death for being a Christian, and then he's converted, and then wants to come be a member of the church that I'm at, and just how difficult that would be. We got, the reality is we've got a guy who's had a terrible past. He's repented of that. He's become a Christian, a great advocate for it.
Yeah.
We're going to have to work through some things there. That's going to be tough. But that's the reality. Thankfully, that's not the situation. Nobody here has killed any of my family members. But we've got some things we're going to have to work through in reality. And so that's what I thought about for question 4.
So I think the two things, faith in God and genuine love of brethren, So if we really love one another, we're going to look past some of the superficial things, some of the things that are not sinful that may be annoying. As brethren, we have some annoying traits. They're not. I'm not saying they're sinful. If they're sinful, they got to be corrected. But if it's just an annoyance, if I love my brother, I can see past that. So I think those things. We got to keep striving. The reason why these troubles exist is because we're not perfect. We're not fully mature, and we got to keep striving for that. Okay. So the next question said, what would be a wrong way to react to the weaknesses you see in others in the local congregation? So I'm sitting back and I'm thinking about different specific individuals here, and I'll tell you, there's some real issues, personal problems people have, spiritual weaknesses that I'm able to perceive in people's lives. How am I going to react to that? What would be some of the wrong ways? Wade?
So I think that what makes it difficult is we all have our own problems. And my problem may not be your problem, and your problem may not be my problem. But we each view the other person's problem as stupid or as...
Yeah, wait, come on, man. Why don't you get over that?
That's easy.
Yeah.
But my problem
You
is
just-
difficult.
Yeah, you don't know.
You don't know what I'm
Yeah.
going through.
Yeah.
And so we each view that. And so that's why we got to get past it. We got to all realize that we each have weaknesses, and we've got to be able to help. What does Galatians 6 says? That we should help our brother if he stumbles.
Yeah. Yeah. So definitely the wrong things to do would be to quit altogether. I hate that expression. People say, I quit the church. Well, you don't quit the church, you quit the Lord. You're quitting on the Lord. You don't quit the church. Obviously to outright give up altogether. But short of that, what sometimes happens is people sort of just kind of draw back. They don't quit, but they draw back. They're less involved. They're less active. They don't interact. They're just there, but they're not really a part because they've been discouraged and people have let them down. And so they react by just sort of withdrawing themselves, losing interest, and being less active. That's definitely the wrong way to go about it.
I put down 1 Peter 3 and verse 8. It says, finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another, love as brethren, be pitiful, be courteous. Verse 9 says, not rendering evil for evil or railing for railing, but contrariwise blessing, knowing that ye are thereunto called, that you should inherit a blessing. I think those are two really good verses. So be of one mind. We're not all going to have the exact same thought process on every single thing, but we can be pulling in the same direction. We can be of one mind. And so that's what we're supposed to do. So we're going to have differences, but we're working toward the same goal. Let's realize
that's
that.
a great verse. I put down Galatians 1 verse 10. Do I now persuade men or God, or do I seek to please men? For if I yet pleased men, I should not be the servant of Christ. Who am I trying to please here anyway? Brethren may let me down, but I'm not serving my brethren. I'm serving the Lord. I got to keep that in mind, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not exactly true. I should serve my brethren too.
serve your
But
brethren.
ultimately,
But the
I
Lord
serve the
number
Lord. Yeah, yeah. All right. Go ahead, Josh.
All right, number 6. It says, consider 1 Kings 19. So turn to your Old Testament, 1 Kings 19. And it wants us to read verse 18. So I may need to get just a little bit of background before I read verse 18. So you remember in 1 Kings 18, that's where Elijah had the victory on Mount Carmel against the prophets of Baal. I mean, he had a great victory, and after he defeated them, a bunch of them were executed. And so what happens is, though, in chapter 19, the first 2 or 3 verses, Jezebel finds out about that, and so she basically commits to killing Elijah. She's gonna have him killed. And so he hid in this cave, and verse 18 of 1 Kings 19 says, "Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which had not kissed him." And so it says, considering that verse, what message from God encouraged Elijah? Well, Elijah had got along this thought process that he was, and I know that's the...
Yeah, the next
skip
question
ahead.
go back to verse 10. Elijah felt this way, 19:10, 1 Kings 19:10. He said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, or very jealous for the Lord of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." I'm all alone here.
Yeah, which is just so crazy. He just had that great defeat of them just in the previous chapter, and you would think if you're Elijah, you're on a spiritual high here. I mean, we just defeated all these people. Obviously, the God of heaven is real. But then he gets over here and Jezebel says she's going to kill him. Well, it's just me.
He loses it.
Yeah, it's only me out here. And so in verse 18, when God tells him there's 7,000 that haven't bowed the knee to Baal, so the message is there, you're not alone here. I mean, there's others that are trying to do the right thing. And that was an encouragement to him when he felt like he was all alone. So for our application, we're talking about disappointment. I think sometimes maybe we feel like I'm all alone in this situation. Everybody else isn't doing right, or it's just me because somebody let me down, and I get totally discouraged, like Elijah.
Yeah.
We need to know that's not the
And we
case.
need to remember we're not alone either.
Right.
There are other faithful
Yeah.
servants who are trying to do the best they can too. And we should never, and so God told Elijah there's still 7,000. Well, there's way more than 7,000 of our faithful
Right.
brethren, and we should
Right.
take encouragement from them. All right, number 8. Josh, go ahead.
All right, number 8 says, name some Bible characters who remained faithful in their service to God, even when others around them left the Lord. Sue?
I wanted to go first. I got a good one, and
All
I
right.
want everybody else to get it.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
Paul and Demas in 2 Timothy 4:10.
Demas hath forsaken me. Yeah.
And
He
how
didn't get.
disappointing was that to him?
Yeah.
That had to have been. I've always thought that 2 Timothy 4, those words right in that section are among the saddest words in Scripture. Paul is all alone. He says, and I thought, it just tugs at your heartstrings when he says to Timothy, verse 9, 2 Timothy 4:9, "Do thy diligence to come shortly unto me, for Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and is departed to Thessalonica. Crescens to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me." And then he says, verse 16, at my first answer, no man stood with me. All men forsook me. I pray God that it may not be laid to their charge. So he's begging Timothy to come. Verse 21, do thy diligence to come before winter. He's feeling all alone, but he doesn't give up. He certainly felt all alone and pretty much forsaken. Only Luke is with me. Do your best to get here before bad winter weather sets in. Here's the powerful Apostle Paul. He needed to know there were some others who were still out there.
I had it on my list too, Sue.
Yeah. I also had Paul. Who else? Who else do you think of? Who Wayne?
Moses, typical of the Old Testament.
Oh, yeah.
he was in the presence of God, receiving the Ten Commandments from God, written by the finger of God, and he comes down and his people are involved in idolatry.
Yeah.
And that's, I think those two questions go well together, because often in the face of a spiritual triumph, right behind that there is a setback that Satan provides that gets you discouraged. After the Mount Carmel incident, Jezebel came and he was cowering because of that. After that great victory, he was cowering. Moses, after that great presence being with God, he comes and his children, the children of Israel, are faithful. So they're serving idols.
Yeah. And they turned on him just again and again and again, but he always spoke up for them. You know,
He was so high.
there were several times when God said, "Stand back now. I'm going to wipe them out, and I'll make a great nation out of you." And Moses said, "Don't do that." You know, and he would have if Moses had pleaded the case of the Israelites. JD?
Well, one I always think about, Jesus after everybody left him, and then secondly, I guess I'd say Jonathan. He even had his own father to order him to kill David, and David had already fled, and he was all alone, really, but he still did what he was supposed to do.
Okay. All right. Good. Wait.
I think about Jeremiah. Jeremiah would stand in the streets and try to beg people, that
They threw him in the pit.
they threw him in a pit. Yeah, I mean, he was basically by himself.
Yeah.
It seemed like everybody was against him, but he just kept going on and on until everybody was basically gone, out of the city.
All those are great examples, and there's more. But you know who I think is the ultimate example is Jesus. We always talk about Peter denying Jesus, but in Matthew 26:56, it says, then, this is at the garden, then all the disciples forsook him and fled. Jesus was alone when he faced all of that. So, we're not going to be, I'm telling you, we're not going to be in that circumstance. We've got just an abundance of faithful brethren that surround us and encourage us, and we should really be thankful for that. But what if you were the last remaining faithful Christian? Still be faithful to the Lord.
Greg, do you think that he had in mind whenever he was asking these questions? So if maybe we keep like a mental list, and you disappoint me, well, Greg's off my list.
Yeah, I'll never think.
After everybody's disappointed me, and I've marked everybody off the list, and I've kind of isolated, so now I'm alone, and I'm the last one I can count on. Maybe that's what he was thinking about when he's asking these questions. I mean, those people, like Jesus, was literally left alone and forsaken. We're not, but I think sometimes in our mind, we put ourselves alone, and so maybe we feel the same kind of way. Like, well, it's just me.
So I don't want to get on your list, right? And you don't want to be on my list. So what we got to do is and this goes back to what we were saying earlier. We have got to work consciously to not be the discouraging factor. I think we all do. We all let one another down in various ways from time to time, in big ways and in little ways. But we got to really be striving to not do that. Don't be that guy. I mean, I'm going to be that guy sometimes, but I want to minimize that as much as possible.
My intention should not be to disappoint people.
Right, exactly. But I'm concerned that sometimes Christians have the mindset, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want to do, and I don't care what you think of me. And I don't care how my conduct impacts you. I just don't care. Get your nose out of my business. Unfortunately, that attitude prevails in too many people. Yeah. Any other thoughts here? Okay. So the question is asked, how can we help new converts and others who are growing discouraged because of their disappointments in other Christians? So what are you going to do? You're trying to help a fellow Christian. He may be a new convert, maybe somebody who's been a Christian longer. But he's really down, and he's very discouraged, and he's just on the brink of giving up because he's so discouraged with the situation that exists with other Christians. What are you going to do for that guy? Anybody? Christy?
Go to God in prayer with them, because look at all the Psalms of David and other people. To me,
So pray with them. Yeah. Okay. Good.
no one's against the one.
Good advice. Anybody else? I think that we've been talking about this quite a bit already. I think it just demands focus on who we're really serving here. We're serving the Lord. That's the ultimate, purpose of our existence, is to serve and glorify God. And so, the problem with that person who's getting discouraged because he sees faults in others, and we're not saying, please, in all of this, don't take away that we're saying overlook sinful things. We're not saying, well, obviously we can't overlook sinful things. But the person who sees issues and weaknesses and problems with others his focus is here instead of here. And so we gotta really work with that person to get their focus in the right spot. Nancy?
I dealt with this multiple times when I was a young Christians who fell into sin, and it was very discouraging, very disappointing. And I had to tell myself over and over, my salvation doesn't depend on them and
Right.
what they do. Like you said, you have to focus back on serving God, and I need to do what I need to do.
Exactly right. Well put. Anybody else? Eric?
I used to worship with a guy. He really struggled, worship with him. And he would, come for 6 months and he'd fall away for a couple of months and then come back and then fall away and then come back. It got to the point where, he would respond to the invitation and no one would go up there and greet him afterwards because they just thought, okay, here he's doing this again. And they were judging his heart. And it just, talk about watching something so disheartening. I'll never forget how this guy, he struggled, but he kept trying. And I was disappointed in the brothers and sisters who did not embrace him when he came back.
Yeah.
Because they just expected it. They expected him to do it again.
I've seen similar situations too, and that's not right and not good for sure. All right.
Sue had a thought.
Who we got? Sue.
The other thing is encourage not just new converts, but like young Christians that were raised in the church. If they see, and kind of like what Wade said, individuals have strengths and weaknesses. And if you see somebody doing a really good job at something, go ask them about it. How do you do this? How do you make that a focus? Like putting others above yourself, and ask questions. How do I get that?
Good point. Good point. All right. Well, real quickly, number 10, Josh.
All right, number 10, it says, is it possible that I expect more of my fellow Christians than I do of myself? Yes. Yeah, it's possible. I think we talked about this early on. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 7, he talked about judging. And if I'm looking at you and your issues, but I'm not taking care of my issues, it's possible for me to think, like I think Wade was talking about, my issues aren't as bad as your issues. And maybe if you do wrong, it makes me feel better about myself. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. I think we do that.
This sort of reminds me of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7, the mote and the beam.
Yep.
I got a big beam sticking out of my eye, but I'm going to pick the little speck out of your eye.
Right.
We need to get our act together personally.
Right.
Yeah. But I do think that it's a real tendency to hold others to higher standards. I've made this point before. I think every congregation I've ever been a member of was at one point or another accused of being unfriendly, which was really peculiar because every church that I've ever been a member of, I personally felt was very friendly. So, but the person who's accusing that, they're just not friendly. Well, what are you going to do to change that or make it better? Have you been friendly to anybody else? Have you shown hospitality to anybody else? Have you gone out of your way to help anybody else? Well, no, but they're not friendly. And so that's that situation of holding others to a higher standard.
Yeah, I was just going to say, of the 7 churches in Asia that are mentioned in Revelation 2 and 3, what was it? 5 of them had serious issues they were dealing with. And so for somebody to get disappointed, like church isn't perfect. Well, I mean, we don't want to be like those churches. We got to work on issues. But if there's a disappointment, that doesn't mean that all. It's all there. You can still be faithful even in a bad situation.
Good point. All right, thanks, everybody. Next week, Lord willing, the topic is, again, tests of our faith, sickness, grief, financial setbacks.